The exhibition is called The Digital Citizen, the Precarious Subject. It brings together 10 artists who look at the idea of citizenship in this digital age. These 10 artists explore this in a number of ways. One of the first ideas was actually to look at the importance of transnationalism and the possibilities that artists kind of are looking beyond nations, but also the mechanisms of technology, lifting the lid on the internet and how all of us need to ask better questions of how that works. One of the fascinating pieces that we have here is called Citizen X, which is a free-to-use browser created by James Bridle several years ago. But what it does is it understands the process of a kind of assignment of algorithmic identity, something that we possibly don't know about, but it's the way that actually authorities assign us an idea of a citizenship status. I was really interested, and it came up in James Bridle's research, that actually there were a group of teenagers in Macedonia who were involved in the creation of fake news. So Kate Stonehill has a film called Fake News Fairytale, and in that it really articulates the way that people were complicit in creating these artificial stories that circulated, and possibly unwittingly were involved in a kind of a dialogue that was about the Trump-Hillary Clinton election. One of the key works in Digital Citizen is a dual screen installation by Alan Butler. This is a kind of frame-for-frame remake of the original Koyaanisqatsi from '83 using the Grand Theft Auto game series. And I think it's a very powerful metaphor for ways in which actually we think about consumerism, consumption, but also ecology, because this is a film that spoke about the Anthropocene, possibly well before the word was being widely discussed.
The work I'm showing in this exhibition is called On Exactitude in Science. On the left screen is a film called Koyaanisqatsi from 1983, which is directed by Godfrey Reggio and scored by Philip Glass. And on the other screen is a shot-for-shot remake that I produced within the Grand Theft Auto video game series. It's this devastating portrait of planet Earth at the end of the 20th century, documenting how people live, how people work, and then in a kind of quite prophetic way finishes up on the stock trading floor and in microprocessors and algorithms. So it was quite ahead of its time in terms of the place we were living in and observing the significance of technology in society and the economy and within capitalism. Thinking about the idea of digital citizens, think about like this immersion we have in technology nowadays, and producing this film was really about immersing myself in this other world. By beginning to explore the depths and details that exist in making up these simulations, it kind of drew me into the idea of can you be an artist in these spaces? And I'd been producing street photography and things like that in video games, but the idea, I suppose, of creating or recreating a full motion picture was really interesting for me. And the fact that there's no actors and it's very pictorial and music and sensory driven film, Koyaanisqatsi, it seemed like a really good place to start.
One of the nice things with doing a group exhibition is to be able to bring a number of different voices, different media together. Within that, there are two younger artists who are graduates of Newcastle University, in particular Peter Hanmer and Petra Zeman. And both of them are kind of working with the ideas of different realities. In particular, Petra Zeman has created her kind of avatar version of herself, exploring the world of Tamriel.
It gives you a nice spatial awareness of a realm that you haven't technically actually entered. This journey is also fairly easy on your avatar, she only has to go through straightforward methods of positioning and construction. Yeah, she has memories and a fictive presence in Tamriel.
How to enter a fictional realm from 2017 sort of follows the format of a YouTube tutorial video. Most of the time, the things I do will be based on YouTube tutorials that I watch. So it's kind of, I guess, reflecting on the DIY aspect of my practice. And another one from last year called Monomyth Gaiden Part 1 Departure. They're all based on anecdotal evidence and my pictures that I take in certain significant locations currently in Japan. And it's kind of using these pop culture inspired pilgrimages that I take in Japan as a starting point to launch into wider ideas about a multi-layered reality that's influenced by fiction and digital cityscapes. It's kind of like a reflection on like the ways we experience reality. An objective version of reality is not quite accessible, and like the way we make sense of it in our brains will be influenced by all sorts of fictions that we consume, from popular media like films we see will affect how we see real life, and it's kind of a reflection on this layering of imagery that creates in this elusive and unstable world.
Wherever I go, I'm in a movie.
It's kind of like looking at like time-based narratives of character growth, as well as going through real spaces that maybe shift along as you go through them. But also, at least in the narrations of the videos, I try to dissect this idea of a linear narrative that only proceeds in a certain way. It's more like using a linear framework to look at something that expands in multiple directions, and like trying to contain something that's quite shifting in one space that doesn't move as much.
If life was a movie, transition would be seamless, like a train shooting along in the landscape. But in actuality, it resembles more the sliding layers of the animation stand, the multiple planes occasionally moving out of sync.
It's kind of like a late 90s, early 2000s like pixelated graphic. And I use a lot of like analog photography for the backgrounds, which is a different kind of old technology. So there's a strong sense of nostalgia. But it's a bit weird because it's kind of a fake nostalgia, because it alludes to like childhood gaming experiences, but I've actually never been a gamer. But I wanted to be a gamer, so it's kind of like I was on the sidelines of this aesthetic movement, and then now I get to feel nostalgic for something I never actually experienced immediately. It's a bit strange.
Peter Hanmer has created a large installation, and this one is called Plato's Lair, Redux, and it's a representation of a project that was first shown at Cheeseburn Sculpture last summer.
Plato's Lair was inspired by the story of Plato's Cave, which is about a group of prisoners who are chained up to a wall of a cave. They can't look left or right. They can only look at the wall in front of them, on which are flickering shadows. Sort of like, so they've been living in a false reality. For me, it fit into the sort of theme of this exhibition, because this idea of the digital reality, fake news, these sort of things, no one knows what quite to believe. I mean, it's important to remember that the protagonists who live within this version of Plato's Lair and in the original still had no idea what was outside. Different character groups have different beats, sort of a caged bird metaphor. Also, in terms of this exhibition as well, I was thinking in terms of like trolls. These characters are living within the space. Obviously, this is their whole world, if you like. Some are having a picnic. They're accepted that this is their only reality. Some are trying to leave it. There's guards in the space who keep them locked up, basically. One of the characters coming in, if you like, to enlighten, there's a guard waiting for her, but they're also ruled over by the tyrant. Within this box, he is the looming presence ruling everything. Plato's allegory of the cave, I think that is hugely relevant to today. I would say ultimate thing that he wanted people to do was to think for themselves and not accept images as fact. In this space as well, it's almost like a cracked reflection of us in some ways.
We're said to live in a time of deliberate disinformation and the rise of fake news. What's fascinating is the way that artists can use metaphors, mechanisms in their work to explore exactly these themes. Ideas like, what does an internet troll really look like? You know, Alan Warburton has created different ways of looking at something.
The work I've made for Digital Citizen is very much about how we use technology to imagine what will come. So I made a lenticular print, a stereoscopic movie, and a magic eye. And all of these formats represent what I think is a very human urge to try and see beyond what's in front of us. Obviously, at the moment, AR and VR tech fulfills this function. And something like a lenticular looks to be obsolete in comparison. It's like a retro technology. But I like how these illusionistic formats express a kind of naive vision of the future, or of a future that maybe never came, or that was interrupted by the trauma of the internet. So I wanted to invoke that feeling a lot of people have in 2019, that they're not really seeing things clearly, like there's something else happening under the surface of current events.
There's no place like home. There's no place like there's no place like home.
So with a group show like this, it's a possibility to allow people to stop and reflect, to experience some artists together, but also to actually pick up some reading material. We've created a resource table here with further interviews and books as well, so, including James Bridle's The New Dark Age, which is kind of important to the thinking behind the exhibition. I see the value of artists to be able to kind of explore the complexity of this world through creating artworks that allow people to think, to develop a nuance, to use the kind of materials themselves to explore what citizenship could mean. It's a question I think we should be asking ourselves, and it's one that these artists do.